A late afternoon sun burns into the side of the houses in Jericho. And Zacchaeus stands in his doorframe, sweating. He's surprised he's sweating because he has on his favorite fine linen robe, his equivalent of the dry fit of the first century. And he loves this robe because it keeps him nice and cool, and because it's so expensive, no one else in town has one. He alone owns the dry fit robe. But he's sweating. And he's standing in the doorframe waiting for his lackey to return. He now has the privilege, having paid for it, of being the chief tax collector in town, which means he doesn't do the dirty work anymore, really. He employs a bunch of lads to go knock the doors and take the coins, and then he takes a really good chunk of what they bring back. Is it fair? No. Is it the way of the world? Yes. Did Zacchaeus work his way up? You bet he did. And so he stands in the doorframe, drumming his fingers, waiting. And he cuts an odd shadow because he's very short. That's part of the reason he's a tax collector. Because school wasn't kind to Zacchaeus. He got bullied a lot, shoved into lockers. He was never picked for the basketball team. People were just unkind. And his family was great, and it was a respite, but something about the treatment of all the other kids kind of sank in and began to make him bitter. And as everyone grew up, his fellow mates went off to do a lot of manual work type things, bricklayers and stonemasons, and, well, Zacchaeus was too short and just not very strong, and so once again, he's cut out of the community. He doesn't enjoy the camaraderie that hard work like that brings. And so Zacchaeus decides, if I'm never going to fit in and they're not going to like me anyway, fine by me. They'll envy me. And so he goes to the Romans, and he begins to work his way up the system of tax collection. Because if no one likes him, at least they'll want his robes, right? He's the one in the fine linen. And as much gold as he gets, it never quite fills the empty place within him, but Zacchaeus doesn't like to think about that too much. Because who does? Who likes to think about how you never kind of get the love that you want? Your family might be great and your friends might be great, but we're all a little bit broken. And so some of us, we try to ingratiate ourselves with others to make them love us. We try to get power to prove that we're worth loving. Or, in the case of Zacchaeus, we abandon the whole pursuit and try to be strong by ourselves. We're all compensating for something, and Zacchaeus knows it, but he'd rather not think about it, and so he's glad when he sees the lackey run over the hillside, and the sound of the clinking silver calms Zacchaeus' heart. But in a short while, after he's counted out his enormous portion of coins, he's drumming his fingers on his counting table. Because a plan has been hatching in Zacchaeus all day, and he can't decide what to do. If the world is good at one thing, it's rumors. And rumor is, this new rabbi named Jesus is creating quite a stir. Rumor has it, he eats with sinners and tax collectors. Rumor has it, there's even a disciple that's a tax collector. And he picks fights with Pharisees, and he disregards the Romans, and Zacchaeus finds that fascinating. But if he's honest with himself, Zacchaeus just has a deep interest in who Jesus is. Because rumor has it, he's the Messiah. And Zacchaeus wants to know if it's true. Does the Messiah actually have time for the misfits and the mess-ups? Does this man really eat with tax collectors? And something about Zacchaeus is just drawn to that. Because no other rabbi has time for him or people like him. And belatedly then, he decides to go. But he's still wondering, does God really have time for me? By the time he gets to the streets, they're full. And Zacchaeus is kicking himself because he's short. And he can't see anything. But he's quick-witted. And he knows that his favorite sycamore fig tree is down the road a bit. And you know sycamore figs in the Middle East. They got these huge trunks and they branch kind of right away into huge branches. And Zacchaeus thinks, I could climb that. So he walks down the road and he looks at it. He looks around to make sure nobody's watching because he's like 45 and he's got to hitch up his robes to like climb a tree. And there's something embarrassing about that, but he's going to do it anyway. And he figures, it's a little dark, the sun's going down, there's leaves, everybody's going to look at Jesus, not at me. So he fumbles up to sort of just high enough to look over people's heads. And he begins to wait for Jesus. And the longer he's in the tree, the more foolish he feels. Is it a fool's errand to try to find God? Is it foolish to try to see Jesus? Pretty soon he can hear people coming, and now, whether he likes it or not, to save face, he's stuck in the tree. So people come, and he leans forward a little bit because he wants to see Jesus. And he sees him coming. And he notices that he's got on a robe that's pretty patched up. Someone hemmed it by hand. And he's a little bit shaggy. And Zacchaeus knows immediately that the values of Jesus are different than his. And he watches him. And then suddenly, the man himself is right under the tree. And he looks up into the tree, slightly, over. And then Zacchaeus sees that Jesus is looking right into his brown eyes. And while Zacchaeus feels a little surprised by that, and his heart rate jumps tenfold, he doesn't feel as embarrassed or caught out as he assumed that he would. Because there's something about the gaze of Jesus that is compassionate, that's curious, that's gracious, and that has some humor in it. Zacchaeus has spent his life being laughed at. He knows what that looks like and feels like. But Jesus instead has got this kind of smirk on his face like, I found you in a tree, don't you think that's kind of funny? And Zacchaeus for the first time sort of thinks, yeah, you know it is. And he feels something inside of him just loosen a little bit. And he wants this moment to kind of last forever because he thinks Jesus understands him. He feels seen. Like somehow Jesus has just validated him. Like Jesus gets it. And just as he's thinking he never wants this moment to end, Jesus puts his hands on his hips and says, you know, Zacchaeus, if you came out of that tree, well, we could have dinner together at your place, right? And Zacchaeus thinks, yeah. And so he scrambles down as slowly as he can because, you know, when you're an adult, you forget that sandals aren't great for climbing trees, and he doesn't want to slip and fall. So he comes slowly, and everyone is staring at him. But he realizes he really just doesn't care because Jesus is going to come sit at his table, and no one has sat at his table for a very long time. And so Jesus makes a sort of gesture of like, well, you know, lead the way. I don't really know where you live. And so they head back through the crowd, and they can both hear all the grumbles. Oh my, the rumors are true. He's going to eat with that tax collector, that fat cat who robs us all. Couldn't he eat with the rabbi? There's got to be a nice Jewish family that the rabbi could eat with. Come on, Jesus, what are you doing? But Zacchaeus isn't really aware of it. Because he's walking and he's sort of catching glimpses of people's faces. And for the first time, he sees them. And he sees the woman down the road who lost her husband last year, and for the first time, he realizes how grief-stricken she is. All he'd done was take the inheritance tax. And a few steps on, he sees a man he went to school with, and, you know, they're the same age, but he looks really old. That the bricklaying is taking a toll above the financial toll that Zacchaeus takes on him. And it just keeps happening. Inexplicably now, Zacchaeus can see the people around him. And he just suddenly tears a little bit inside because he realizes he's hurt everybody. And now, for the first time, it hurts him that he's been taking advantage of everybody. And he just feels this deep desire to name it, and so he just stops. And Jesus is walking, and then he realizes Zacchaeus is nowhere, and turns around. And Zacchaeus says, you know what, look, I don't know, like maybe I could give half of my possessions or 4 times everything I've ever stolen back to everybody. I just want to make it right. And since Sanhedrin law said that money collected in taxes was too tainted to use for charity, it's a laughable desire, according to the law. But Zacchaeus doesn't care about the law. Jesus isn't worried about the law in this moment either. Because Zacchaeus just wants to come clean. Something about Jesus seeing him, he's now able to see the people around him. And he just needs to make it right. He needs to come clean, which is interesting. Because the name Zacchaeus, it means clean. With kind of an undertone of innocence. And there's something childlike in this moment for Zacchaeus. A kind of innocence. In which he just wants to make it all right. He just wants to right the wrongs he's done. There's an innocence about that. He's not trying to trick anybody. He's not trying to beguile anybody. He's not even trying to trick himself anymore. He's just saying the truth. And it feels good. It feels real. And maybe it's the realest he's ever felt. And maybe this is who he was always supposed to be before everything got so complicated. Before it all got so hurt and broken, and the world layered so much on him, and he layered so much on that. Maybe innocence and kindness and seeing others is who Zacchaeus really could be. And something about Jesus makes that feel really possible. And so he says that he's going to give up all these things, and it's just a sentence, it's just a first step, but Jesus smiles. And he puts a hand on Zacchaeus' shoulder, and so all the naysayers can hear. He says, today, salvation has come to this house, because this man, like the rest of you, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. And Zacchaeus suddenly realizes that what he feels is found. He didn't know he was lost. He didn't realize all of his ways to get love and to feel that people envied him or to feel important had left him really with nothing. That he was lost. But the feeling of found, he doesn't want to lose that. He doesn't want to lose what it feels like to be truthful. And it's just one evening, and it's just one dinner, and it's just one night with Jesus, coming to his house, to sit at his table. But Zacchaeus knows it'll change his life forever. Because he's glimpsed who he could really be and what might really be possible. May you see God. Or perhaps more importantly, or more rightly said, may God see you. May the compassionate and curious and gracious gaze of God find your soul and see you for who you are, who you could be, all the things that are deeply true about you. And may you see others. And may we all know that the Son of Man came to seek and save all of us, so that the lost might be found.